the soul of rivers deep. Come and wake me from my sleep. Feed and feast at harvest time. Rouse me up and give me wine. Dance and play in fields and glades. Sow the seeds of summer fades. Ripe the berries in autumn's wake. Bring out the drums and merry may. Bring out the drums and merry may.
I'm Amy Jenkins-Smith, and I first came to Eskdalemuir when I was 9 months old with my mum and dad, and they were visiting Samyling. At that time, mum was doing her yoga teacher training, was getting interested in Buddhism, and her very good friend Chris Mansell was working at Samyling as an artist, learning kind of traditional screen printing techniques and painting. And so over sort of the course of my childhood, I suppose, we started coming more and more. At that time we were close to Edinburgh. And then mum started doing the Mudra course with Siddhi Rinpoche at Samyling. So from the age of about 4 or 5, we would come during the summer and camp at Samyling. And I would hang out with all the other kids at Samyling, who most of whom I still know today. And mum would go and sit in the temple doing the course. And then when I was about 8, we moved to the valley and lived in a house that was owned by Samyling called Moodlaw House. And there were, I think, 3 different families living in the same big old farmhouse. And then next door there was another family. So I became very good friends with all the kids there and started going to primary school here in this building. So at that time, this was the kind of dining hall and our sports hall. We also had a piano in here, so you could play piano. And there was a hatch just about where that door is now, where there was a kitchen behind, and then where the cafe and restaurant is at the back was our kind of classrooms and the loos and things. So more or less a similar format, but yeah, different change of use now. So it's nice to be able to still come into the building, even though it's no longer a school, which I think is a shame for the community, but it's been turned into something which is a very positive asset for Eskdalemuir, I think.
How many sort of pupils were there at that time, Amy? Was there a lot of pupils, teachers? Or?
There was one teacher, whose name I've completely forgotten. And then I think the least we were whilst I was here was 8. So there was myself, Rosie Smithers, who's still a good friend of mine, Greg and Sapphire Skillen, Alex Buckley, Alana Cragen, and Reese de Villiers, most of whom their parents were involved with Samyling in some way, and most of whom I still see from time to time. And then I think the primary was about 15 of us went up to. I think there was a batch of younger kids came in just as I was getting towards the end of primary school. So it kind of increased a little bit. But yeah, we would all be in one classroom together, and it would be maths time, and then the teacher would teach maths from kind of age 5 to age 11, 12. So yeah, I do think, looking back, that our education was kind of like a bit patchy. There was definitely a bunch of sort of basic grammar and spelling skills that I was missing a little bit by the time I got to secondary school. And I even felt it by the time I went to university. I think I kind of made an extra effort to learn some of those things because I felt like I'd never really taught them properly. But what you kind of missed in kind of basic curriculum, I think it was made up for by the kind of community side of it. And growing up in Eskdalemuir in general was a really kind of magical experience. I think we had a lot of freedom. There was a lot of escaping out into the woods and going swimming in the rivers, and there was usually a gang of us riding around on bikes or going riding on horses in the forest. And I don't think in any other circumstance you'd really get that. Even nowadays in a rural community it probably wouldn't be so free, but there was a sense that everybody knew each other because they were all connected through Sammy and through the community, and therefore everyone sort of looked out for each other, and because it felt like a sort of safe space, parents felt like it was okay for us to be off doing whatever.
My name's Angie Ball, and I first came to Eskdalemuir I think it was about 1973 or so, and my relationship at that point was really to come to to visit Sammy Ling, I suppose at the beginning of a sort of spiritual quest. And at that time when I came to Sammy Ling the very first time, and it's remained with me ever since, and funnily enough a lot of people have said that, was just coming over the hill into the valley and seeing the wide vista of the whole valley, and it was like coming home. And quite a few people have said that, and my connection with Sammy Ling was a part of it, but it wasn't just that. It was something very familiar about the land and the whole space, as though I had been here other times. I mean, as a Buddhist, I do believe in previous lives, but I mean, even then, it just was quite a powerful feeling. And also the people I met, like I'd known them before as well. So at that time I came for a short visit, and I remember being invited to a party up in the wilds, up the tracks. So part of my experience was Sammy Ling, but it was also the kind of people that were already living in the community, and we had quite a wild party. And shortly after I decided to move up, so I moved from London to a place called Moodlaw, which is across the river from here in the valley. And Moodlaw in those days, it was sort of mid-70s or like late 70s. It was a quite wild place in the middle of nowhere, except there were these barns next door and there were a few houses dotted around. And it was owned by a guy that had bought it and another place called Finnegal with the idea of having kids from the city to have camps and things and to be in the country. But it never happened really for him, sadly, but he did let us all stay there for free. So I ended up staying at Moodlaw and ended up doing a retreat at Moodlaw as well, with 5 other people at the various time there. And it was a kind of real sense of being a pioneer. I mean, we were quite young. It was very wild weather most of the time, but somehow it was exhilarating just being out in all elements. We had to walk everywhere, and so we'd walk over to Sammy Ling to the evening prayers and pujas, which was probably a good mile and a half through the little tracks and things around, following the little river. But then we'd have to quite often wade across the big river to get into Sammy Ling at the end. Sometimes I'd have waders right up to here, so even in very strong currents it was quite scary sometimes, but somehow we were quite intrepid, so you did it. And so it was that sort of really exhilarating. You'd go in, you'd sit in the shrine room, do your Mahakala puja or whatever, come out feeling really kind of invigorated, wade back through the river and back to Moodlaw. So it was kind of quite special times. We had a local farmer nearby, Farmer Walker. So I think I was there for about a couple of years, and during that time, in the summer, we had traditional haymaking times, so everybody pitched in and helped the farmer with the hay bales to sort of stack them up. He didn't have all the machinery in those days. And then the farmer's wife would come out and give us lemon barley water and sandwiches and things. We'd sit in the field, just, ageless, timeless, really, to do that sort of work all together. So it's a sense of a joint community effort with the farmer, which was really nice.
My late father was a shepherd, and he moved to Overcassock in the May term 1948, and he was there for 10.5 years to the November term 1958, which was the normal thing with agricultural workers. Twice a year you could move from one farm to another. When we went there in 1948, I had to walk to Davington School, unaccompanied, because my mother had just had my twin sisters in 1947, so she wasn't able to accompany me to school, so I had walked unaccompanied from Overcassock to Davington School, 2 miles each way, in all weathers, rains, hail, snow. If it was a very wet day, it took a bit longer to get in because I cleaned out all the drains on the way to school.
And you probably had to carry, did you have to carry schoolwork with you as well?
Yeah, well, there wasn't much schoolwork to carry in those days, no, we didn't get much in the way of homework in those days, very little. But you had to carry your lunch with you, because there wasn't any sort of lunches provided at the school at that time. Everybody carried their own lunch. Later on, when I went to Eskdalemuir School, after they closed everything around about 1950 or 51, I'm not sure which, then went to Eskdalemuir. So when we moved to Eskdalemuir, it was actually easier for me because the school car came and picked me up at the bottom of the hill at Overcassock, so I had a much shorter distance to walk. Quite often they would have dances in the village hall, and also at Halloween time there was a Halloween party for the children. In fact, there'll be quite a few photos around with the children all lined up in front of the stage during the Halloween party. And all in the fancy dress. Yeah.
And you had local musicians playing for the Cayleys?
Well, we had the Eskdalemuir Band at Eskdalemuir then. Geordie Bell was on the fiddle, Walter Beatty on the accordion, and there's a couple of guys, one from Chapel Now and another one from Langham on the accordion and piano. Well, there was somebody else on drums, of course, as well, yeah. But Geordie and Walter were the two Eskdalemuir guys that were in the Eskdalemuir Band.
All right, that sounds good fun.
It was, there's a lot of good fun, yeah.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit, because you were also mentioning about the observatory. And
well, the observatory was very, very early part of the 20th century that the observatory was built. It moved from, I think it was Bracknell, just outside London, because of the extension of the underground, I think, due to the electromagnetic fields, I think, was going to affect it being a magnetic observatory, not a weather observatory, although they did hourly weather reports at one time for the Met Office, and also, but it was primarily a magnetic observatory.
My name is Claire Brown, and I've been living in Eskdalemuir since 2003. I must admit, when I moved here, I was shocked actually, because I couldn't get my takeaway, because I used to get a takeaway on a Friday night after work, and I don't know what I was expecting, but and also we came and it was very dry, and because we were on a tank, a private water supply, the water had run out, but I didn't realise that, so I turned the tap on, no water came out, so I phoned the plumber immediately, and he came up and he said, "You've run out of water." So, what do you mean, run out of water? How's that happened? So it's been a learning experience from that moment, really, living in the countryside, much more difficult than I anticipated it would be.
yes.
Yes, the observatory's been here for over 100 years, and it was originally located in Kew Gardens in London. But as the advent of the trams came along and telephone lines, railway lines, etc., magnetic readings were not possible because they would be affected by all of the things going on, the activities. So they took out a sixpence and they put it on a map, on somewhere on a map of Britain, but the only place in Britain at that time where it didn't touch railway lines or any interfering, structures, was Eskdalemuir. So they decided that was the perfect place, and the first sod was cut for the building in 1904, July 1904, and by about 1910 they were making observations here, and the observations have been made from the same place, the same shed, for over 100 years. So one of the very attractive things about the observatory is that we've got, in fact, in the world really, we've got the most consistent geomagnetic data from one place. And that's why Eskdalemuir is so highly thought of in terms of the geomagnetic community.
My name is David Cartner. I was born at Clark Hill, which is just about a mile down the road from here. Went to this school in this room, was here until I was 12, and then went to Langham. I was Langham for almost 3 years. I was one of the lucky ones. I could leave in Easter. I didn't need to go into the summer because I was desperate to get home to work at home. So the rest of my life was spent at Clark Hill until 2009 when we sold up. So that's a bit of my history for where I came from and how long I was here.
Can you just say, David, did you actually help with the farming during that time? Was that part of what you did?
Well, I was helping on the farm long before I left the school. Because I remember Mrs. Frame telling me a while after I'd left school, I'd been late one morning and I'd said I was helping to turn up the taps, or tips I think I'd said. And she'd wait till her husband came home to find out what I'd been doing because she didn't know what I was meaning. But it was actually I was helping to put turnips out for the sheep in the morning before I came here. I did a lot of work on the farm before I left school. I also did help out at the post office for delivering letters from what was Bernard's, the old smithy, right down to Crury, across the ford. I can't remember if it did Castle Hill, back up with Carrick and back up to the post office, delivering letters if Jimmy Law was, if he was busy in the blacksmith shop, if she was a blacksmith. His wife had the post office. I also worked in the nursery down at Whiteyet, which is no longer there, planting seedlings out for the tree and sometimes in the summer holidays.
Whereabouts is that, David? Where is that?
Down Whiteyet, towards Castlemuir.
Oh, okay.
Aye, between Castle Hill and Castlemuir.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 houses, well, might be 3 houses down on the left-hand side, and in there used to be a nursery.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what I did, and then once I left school, I was at home all the time. Just doing a bit of anything. Wherever I was needed, I was there. I also sometimes helped out. We used to do contracting, because my father had a contracting business, started after the war. I think if I remember right, he started with a car and trailer, and then he bought a chassis and cab wagon, I think it was a 3-ton wagon, and my brother built the body for it and the container, and then the contracting business took off from there. During my teenage years, I was in the Eskdale Young Farmers Club and moved up to the chairman of it at one period. Unfortunately, that's no longer there now.
Mm-hmm. And did you have kind of social events through those clubs?
Well, there was a lot of social events with young farmers because there was a lot of, there was some dances, but there was a lot of stock judging. Was at Smithfield a few times, stock judging with the late Mr. Musheter for Georgefield. He took classes for stock judging and went down to Smithfield and judged, and came second one of the years at Smithfield. Also did sheep shearing competitions and took part at the Highland Show.
Well, my name is Christine Jeffrey, and I was born in Carlisle, so I'm a sort of local. But I'm called Dolma, and I'm called Dolma because the Tibetans couldn't say Christine. They would come out as Krushish Trushish. So His Holiness 16th Karmapa gave me the name Dolma Tsering, so I've used Dolma ever since. Came to Samiling for the first time when I was about 24, and there was hardly anything here then. And then I came back permanently when I was 26, and so I went to Akon Rinpoche, who at that time was just around and about like an ordinary person, trained in art. I got a master's in fine art, and I felt I should be using it for people's greater benefit. And it's a long story, so to cut it very short. He said he'd think about it, and then he got back to me and said, after about a week, and said, you come and you help Sherpa Beru, who is the artist at Samiling, master artist in the Kamagadri tradition of Tibet. And so that's what happened, that's what I did. Well, you have a class system in Tibet like you do here, really. So he came from the Hoi Polloi. His family was old and established, and he was put in a monastery when he was very young, about 8 or 9, and he was very gifted in arts, but also particularly in singing, all the chanting. And he learned to be an umze, so you have to have memorized huge amounts of texts and pujas and so on to be able to chant those, but he did that. And he also learned how to cut all those dancing robes that they do, the Tibetan dances with the masks and the costumes. He knew how to cut those, which is something also very prestigious because those brocades were very valuable. And how to make the masks, and then he knew how to dance, so he taught the dancing. And you'd have sort of, years where you did that, and then you'd be moved on to something else. Well, for the beginning of the temple, I just remember Akon Rinpoche coming in to the studio room, and days of talking with Sherab and getting out books, and they were looking at pictures of photographs of Tibet and monasteries in Tibet, and endless discussions and this and that. But really it was Sherab that designed everything in the temple. The architecture, there were limitations from planning permission here. So, Rinpoche and he worked together within those parameters. But the insides, and then there was a lot of people around who came. They're all listed in the book I made about his 100th anniversary birthday. A lot of people came with them. It was very interesting because, as you know, around Akon Rinpoche, people just turned up when they were needed. It was extraordinary. So people came like Lenny, who knew about silk screen painting, and Max with their carving, and all sorts of things like that. But because of my background in fine art, and I'd done a lot of sculpture, I really wasn't a painter, I was a sculptor, I was able to bring quite a lot of useful suggestions about, that you could cast things to replicate them a lot, like the decorations, and then the idea of gold leaf on the paintings, and all kinds of things like that.
I first came to Eskdalemuir in about 1995, maybe, because I was in Edinburgh studying religion, and Samling was very much on the map there, and so quite a few friends could come down here and visit Samling, and a couple of my friends took refuge at Samling. So that's when I first came. But then came to live here in 2003, and that was very much I landed here. I wasn't in a very happy state, and I'd been wandering around Ettrick and here and Cumbrian valleys for 3 months or so in the winter of 2003, and eventually spoke to an old friend. He said, just go to Samling, and that's how I ended up living here. What about you?
So I was living, well, I'm Kirsten, and I was living in Nottingham before I moved here. And I first came up here in 2005 visiting, and stayed at Samling. And then I was working as a nurse in addiction at the time, and was on the brink of burnout. I remember the first time I came on the bus coming over the hill, because I'd never been so remote. I'd always lived in sort of a village just outside of a town, and then in Nottingham in the city. And I can remember coming on the bus over the hill and having tears in my eyes and thinking, I'm just in the middle of nowhere, and it feeling really nice, and then feeling like I'd come home actually. And that wasn't just Samling, it was the valley. It was just this feeling of coming home. So I would come every 6 weeks. I used to work my sort of days off on my rota so that I could have every 6 weeks I could come for about 10 days or something. And yeah, and then we kind of met on one of those visits, didn't we? Sparked up a friendship.
Yeah, so I at the time I guess I was living in a 1-bedroom flat in Eskdalemuir, and working in the cafe, in the Samling cafe, and that's where we met.
Yeah.
Me serving you teas and coffees.
Yeah.
And you disrupting my work.
2008, so it was before we had children. And that was
yeah.
It was a funny one, wasn't it? Because we were actually on the brink of thinking about moving to Edinburgh. I was living with you. Your lease was coming up because the person who you rented.
Well, it wasn't even really a lease, but yeah, the previous owner was Rita Marison, and she actually bought the school from Michael Tuck, yeah. And then she had a plan to turn it into a retreat centre. And she had an extension, and she really actually did an amazing job here. She restored the old school cupboards, and just made the house, brought it up to date, whilst honouring its past. And she added some bedrooms above the schoolroom, so she extended its possibilities of how many people could stay here. And she used to do occasional Sunday music things in the schoolroom, and that's how I met her. And she invited me to come and stay here, to come and play here. So I came to a few of those.
We had the choice of here actually, or Jock's Stables Cottage, and that was this was on the market to be sold, but they were going to sell Carrick at some point, so we could go to either company. This was.
But
for
I
rent.
was really keen to go back to Traquair, to
Yeah,
live somewhere
yeah.
either in Edinburgh or Traquair, preferably Traquair.
But anyway, this came up for rent, didn't it? And
yeah, so we
about
were at a festival, and George, what's George's surname?
George, Rebecca, and George.
Yeah, George.
Anyway, you know what I mean. He
rang us up and said it's for rent, and so we rang Rita, and she was like, yeah, come and see it. So we came on the Monday after the festival. She showed us round and agreed to rent it to us for £40 a week.
Oh. I know.
5-bedroom house.
She was really happy for it to be a business or do whatever you wanted, but I mean it still was on the market, wasn't it, at that point?
And it was
yeah.
had she taken? Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. And then so we agreed it, and then a week later the phone goes. It was like my last week in the flat, and the phone goes, and she was like, Nick, I really like the idea of you and Kirsten coming to live here. I think you should buy it. And I was like, well, Rita, we haven't got the money. She's like, it doesn't matter. I think you should. Well, I'll take whatever you've got. So that was 2008 that we bought it, and Finney was born 2009.
And then Jazz,
2011.
yeah, 2011.
Yeah, so that was why I wanted to live closer to Edinburgh, because for music there's obviously not much work around here. But this presenting itself with the schoolroom, actually we rented the school side of the house to make money, because music doesn't pay particularly well, and Kirsten gave up her nursing and
Be a mum.
to be a mum, and you carried on doing other jobs.
We did Airbnb, didn't we? I used to do a bit of cleaning around about, and then we did Airbnb. Well, we had long-term rent sometimes, depending on, sometimes there were people in the valley that just needed somewhere to live, so we would long-term rent, and then otherwise we did Airbnb, so cleaning and more cleaning, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For quite a long time we did that.
Yeah.
That was a good sort of income, really.
So that actually was sort of bread and butter, along with the music, and I busk in Dumfries and Carlisle and Peebles, and eventually started teaching in Peebles. But then saw, obviously this was ideal for a musical life because of the big schoolroom, but we were dependent on the income from it. But eventually started doing concerts, in their house concerts, and then saw the potential of the old Davington Church, which is behind the wood just here, as a potential music studio. And there was a hole in the roof, so we and it wasn't being repaired, so we felt that our neighbours might be open to selling it if they weren't repairing it, because they're farmers, but they were in their 80s, so we thought maybe they were just sort of winding the farm down a bit, which actually wasn't really the case, but they were willing to sell it, and they sold us the church, and that was the plan, to turn it into a music studio. But then the pandemic happened, and my mum died, we inherited some money, and then suddenly we didn't really need to do the Airbnb business anymore, so that became the studio, and now we have a church without a roof on it, and
no access,
and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. We will develop it, but we're actually doing works on the house here, and so that project has stalled. But it is really lovely, because the Reeds, who were the other farmers, agreed to sell us the other half of the wood. So we now, and the school, and a patch of wood, which if you look at the Langham archive from 100 years ago, there's a photograph, and there was a full village here, with an enormous vicarage. It's a stunning photograph taken from the other side of the valley here. What's it called up over there? Dunfermline. And you get to see what Davington would have looked like. Now all that's left now is the farm, and here the school and Davington Cottage. And actually in the photograph you can see the observatory as well, actually.
So I'm Lara Porter. I moved here in 2001, and that was post Foot and Mouth. So we came up here to manage an estate for Lord Tanlaw, so we managed that for, I probably did 15 years managing it. We turned it organic. It had 6 holiday houses on it, which we then converted and made them into long-term lets, because we felt that the valley was dying with it all being on holiday houses, so we tried to encourage people with children to move into the valley. At that time my son was about 3, and we came to the school for mother and toddlers, and that was my first introduction to the old school, and it was lovely. So because the farm was further down the valley, and because I was organic, I kind of had a foot in the sort of Buddhist, and also in the farming, but I wasn't really proper farmer because we were organic, and we weren't really proper Buddhist because I wasn't really proper Buddhist, but I could mix in both circles, so that made it really easy for us. And the valley was there was very much a divide between the communities of sort of the Buddhist community and the sort of people that had been here beforehand. But I never really got involved in that. I felt it was really important that we were just all together. So it's a beautiful valley, my first, it is a lovely valley, and it's full of all the prehistoric sites, which is what really excites me. So, yeah. My role, I've been here sort of 2.5 years, and I came as operational development manager. I got the job, although I kind of was the only person sort of suitable, I think. But I didn't have all the skills for the post, but they were willing to give me a shot, the board, so I came, and I think it's been challenging. It has periods of being very challenging and then periods of being extremely good. So the challenging times are when you're getting funding applications in, or there's, you know, people are poorly, or there's no electricity, or, you know, and things like that. So, but as a whole, we've had more activities for people to do. I feel that the thing I've brought maybe is the glue for the community. So I don't see myself as a manager, because I'm rubbish at managing anything, but I feel that I'm a people person. So I hope people come and they feel that it's theirs, and then they take ownership of it, and then they then grow and use it and make it the hub that it's meant to be. I came post-COVID,
Right.
and I don't think, I mean, I can't really speak for things how it was before, but I think the hub has changed dramatically since before COVID.
Right.
And it didn't, I think the community all pulled together and sort of set up their own little networks. And I don't know, you know, and I think the hub would have been instrumental in that, you know, the people within the board and things. But because I wasn't here, I didn't really have much impact. You know, I was marrying people in Gretna at the time.
Nice.
So I missed that out.
Well, I'm married. When we came, there was my late husband, John, my son, Andrew, my daughter, Lindsay, and myself at Glendarg. Lots of locals call it Glenderg, so it's either Glenderg or Glendarg. So Glenderg is a 1900 acre farm, and it's at the very top of the Esk Valley in Eskdalemuir, and we farm mainly suckler cows, about 100 suckler cows, and 1100 mainly Cheviot, South Country Cheviot ewes. And well, my experience of coming to Eskdalemuir is I really feel that I'm so privileged to live in such a lovely place, lovely farm. So really just in the hope that generations will, you know, come to live here and stay here. I find in recent years, when people come to live here, they tend to want to stay in their own homes, and they don't seem to go out to the village hall, as much. I'm maybe wrong in that, but that's the feeling I get. You know, they don't seem to want to come into the community and be part of the community. I have been on, and am on lots of committees. Been on the community council. I'm secretary of, people call it the village hall, but it's actually the ESMP hall, which is the ex-servicemen's public hall. It was gifted from the Duke of Buccleuch in 1924. So we've just celebrated 100 years of the hall being there. It was for the use really of the community. And what else will I say?
Can I just ask you, May, when you talked about people not engaging so much in the hall and community, do you think that's something that's changed in recent years, or was it like that when you first arrived?
No, when we first arrived here, you know, there would be, well, the school was open at the time, so this hub, which is a wonderful place now for the community, you know, the hub wasn't here then, so it was really just the village hall that would do Sunday afternoon teas. And going back even further back, there used to be dances. People used to come, I've been told, people used to come in bus loads from Lockerbie, Ettrick, Langham, all over, really.
Well, my name's John Chinnery. I was an undergraduate in London University, going through that, and then postgraduate. And after I'd sort of got my PhD, I decided I had enough of that, and decided I want to go up north. And I was into martial arts then, karate, and I saw in a magazine, karate magazine, this article on Sammy Link Tibetan Centre. I thought, oh, that looks interesting. So I said, I'm going to go and visit and see what it's all about. Because it was in the magazine, I thought, well, there must be some connection. So I went up there for a week and really was bowled over. And just a week, and then I came back down south again. It wasn't long before I sort of decided to uproot and move to Sammy Link. And that's where it all started. This is about just after Trungpa had left. It was about 74, 73, something like that. And then I was living at Sammy Link.
My name's Nancy Chinnery, and I'm from Canada. And I ended up in Eskdalemuir. I was at art college, and I was basically decided in, Christmas 73 or January 74 to take a 6-month sabbatical. Because I was just messing about and wasn't being serious. So I thought I would just take 6 months.
You're a medical student, weren't you?
Well, that was before my art school days. Anyways, I thought I would just, have 6 months off and then get serious and start doing things properly. So I got on a flight to London to stay with an old school friend. And being a colonial, when you say, oh, I'm going to the UK or something, invariably people will say, well, go and see such and such, and go and see such and such, and go and, look up my great uncle, blah, blah, blah. And so I had a whole load of postcards, and one of them was from somebody who had been at Sammy Link that I knew back in the 60s. And, I think it wasn't Trungpa's Day, actually, had said, I was there for a winter, go and stay. So I did. And he had written Mr. Sammy Link on the back of a postcard. So I got a job. I was in London for a while, then I got a job on a farm in Coopershire. And when I got to the job, I showed Catherine McDowell all these postcards I had, and I showed her this one. I said, this is interesting. And she looked at it, she goes, oh, you don't want to go there, dear. And I said, why not? She said, we helped them move in, her and her friend Marjorie. We helped the Tibetans move in, when they first came up from Oxford. And she said, it's all drugs and hippies. And I said, oh, I definitely want to go. And I stayed at Sammy Link for a week. And I think you were there.
Oh yeah, I was.
And I met him, and I thought, and there was quite a lot of interesting people at that time too. I thought it was quite interesting. So anyways, come the autumn, I was supposed to start at Edinburgh Art College, but then at the very, very last minute, my grant got pulled. So I had no money, and I didn't want to stay on the farm over the winter, so I thought, I'll just go to Sammy Link.
Did you have a sense of the...
I didn't really know much about the valley itself, because I was just embroiled in Sammy Link, and I was just there all the time. I was a resident, and I hardly left, except I was designated to be the shopper. So I drove the van to Dumfries once a week and did the shopping. It was a big long list. So that's about the only time I actually left Sammy Lynn. So,
But I was quite different because I'd been working on a farm, you know, for months beforehand, quite a long time beforehand, and I was not that into Sammy Lynn at all. So I joined the Women's Brule in the first couple of months I was there, and I got to know all the locals, all the gossip, and all the carries-on of the local community. And for me, being a Canadian, an urban person, I found it all incredibly fascinating. All these shepherds and farmers, and then all these hippies, supposed hippies. I love the contrast of all the different people, and I actually, So it was very different, the locals, than they are now. It was really different because it was mostly local Scottish people. Many of them, there was virtually no. Those first few years, most people who lived in Eskdalemuir did not have a car.
Yeah.
There was about 4 cars: the school car, Geordie Bell's car, and then the big farms all had a Land Rover. But like in the village where the council houses were, none of the people who lived in the council houses had cars.
And Geordie Bell was a local postman at that time.
Geordie Bell was the local person in that time who knew everybody. And I made particularly good friends with him because he had a brother that came from the same village that my father was born in Saskatchewan. So from day one we were bosom pals. But it was very different, you know, it really was isolated.
Yes.
Like so few people had cars, it was extraordinary really.
And
so
there was no bus?
There was no buses and nobody had cars. Sammy Lynn had a Land Rover and a van, and that was it. And so you wanted to go anywhere, you literally had a thumb, you know, hitch, or bum a lift with, you know, one of half a dozen people to get out. And we moved on until 91.
yeah.
And then we moved to Linwood, which is the old post office. Geordie Bell had died in 1988, and his sister carried on as long as she could on her own. But she was in her 80s by then, Jeannie Bell. And then she went into a home, and then very soon afterwards, you know, she had to sell the house. So we very luckily managed to buy it.
Yeah, miracle.
It was a bit of a miracle. Yeah, and so we did it up, and we've been there ever since. And then we'd been there for about 3 or 4 years. After Jean had gone to Langham, the post office shut. It had been a post office since 1930. I can't remember if it was 32 or 35. Geordie and Jean had it as a post office then. So I think it had stayed as a post office until Geordie's death, I think. 88.
Well, then it moved.
And then it moved to a couple of places along the valley, and then Karen had it at Carrick, and then she didn't want it anymore. And so they asked me if we would take it back. So I think, I don't remember the exact time we took it back. It could have been 96, 95, 96.
Something like that, yeah.
So the post office then came back, complete with furniture, it's the same desk and everything, honestly. It was a bit of a joke, actually.
Yeah, using all Geordie Bell's.
Yeah, all Geordie Bell's stuff had just moved around the valley onto this desk on wheels and everything, so it all was just slotted back into where it had been for all those nearly 50 years beforehand. It was really funny, actually.
Yeah.
No, I first came to Eskdalemuir in 1969 as a visitor to the very early beginnings of the Sammy Lynn Tibetan Centre. It was a time of, you know, great social change. I was living in London. I had an interest in all things to do with spirituality and the alternative society at the time. And I'd heard and met a Tibetan Lama in London, and I'd heard about Sammy Lynn. I read about it. A friend of mine had written an article in International Times, which was a sort of hip newspaper, and decided to come up in the summer of, did I say 68 or 69? I can't remember. Right. And I hung around for about 6 weeks, and then kept coming back, hitchhiking mainly up from London, staying a wee while around Sammy Lynn, and in 1974, on a hitchhiking trip around the Celtic fringes, I ended up wanting to show my then girlfriend Sammy Lee. And I met an old friend of mine from London who lived in a place called Finnegill, which was a herd's cottage some 6 miles up a track from Borland in the middle of nowhere, no electricity, no telephones. And I met him at Kidham Hill, interestingly enough, which is another similar place, miles up a track, but over this side of the sort of watershed. I was on Finnegill's the Borland side. And I'd been staying in Samyling and walked up to see friends at Kidham Hill. They weren't there, and he was staying there looking after the place. And he'd said, would I'd like to take over looking after his animals for a few weeks whilst they went to Morocco, as people did in those days, just up and went places. And we ended up staying there for several years. And a group of us, people who'd had a connection with Samyling, lived there, but it wasn't, strongly associated with Samyling, other than the people that lived there. And I lived there so I came up there in 74, and I've been in this area ever since. Lived in Samyling for a number of years when we were building the temple there, and I worked on the construction side, also learnt how to repair agricultural machinery, cement mixers, hoists, you name it. It was an interesting time. We had the opportunities to go off and do these government-sponsored training courses, and various people involved in that building project went off and did different things: woodwork, plastering, bricklaying, and I chose agricultural machinery repair and maintenance, mainly because I had an interest in working with metal, but I was more inclined to be working with blacksmithing. That was very attractive, which wasn't part of the course, but I did learn a bit of welding. And that's now, 50 years ago. So I hung around in the area, lived in Samyling for a bit, lived by the observatory in Eskdalemuir after living in Samyling, split my time between there and Edinburgh, where I worked in Edinburgh, worked for a mental health organisation, rapidly climbed up the greasy pole of management in that, involved in a lot of project development. It was an exciting time. All the big hospitals were closing down, and there was a lot of short-term funding available for developing things in the community. I've always had an interest in community activity and community things, and had an interest in mental health, mainly fermented through Samyling and meeting people who were dealing with mental health sort of difficulties. And we moved to Todshaw Hill, which is just in Eskdalemuir, just in the parish of Eskdalemuir, right on the border with Hutton. No, not Hutton, North Milk, which is Borland is part of North Milk. And in Samyling, I got involved with the community council in Eskdalemuir for my sins, which I've been involved with for about 40 odd years. And that played quite a key role in the establishment of the hub, with two hats on, one as a member of the community and another as to the community council. That there was quite a lot of concern that we'd be really isolated without a primary school. And it had an important social function, not just in the education of children, but as a place where people who lived in a fairly scattered community had at least one place to meet, albeit at the school gate or at parents' nights or sports days or those kind of things. And I saw that it had a very important social function other than just the education of children. Around that time, we'd lost the pub. Well, actually, the pub had gone a number of years before. That little shop that Mrs. Young had gone. The village hall was not a popular place for informal meetings. It didn't offer the opportunity of informal meetings, and I thought that was quite an important part of the sort of social assets of a community, as a place to meet informally. Pubs obviously got that. Got that asset. So anyway, this school consultation came along. The parents and the community council objected to the school closure. saying that it was necessary to keep it going. And about a year later, it came up again. The numbers had just fallen through the floor because there were no kids being born in Eskdalemuir at that time. We were all moving on into later. My peers were all moving on into later middle age, you know? And they'd had their kids, and you know, kids had grown up, moved on. Other people weren't coming with young kids. One of the disincentives probably was there was no school, but also the whole property market had changed, and Eskdalemuir had been a place of relatively affordable property, but as we moved into the 20th century, 21st century, people were much more flexible in how they worked. Some people could work a long way from their workplaces, internet, all that sort of stuff. And house prices went up considerably in that period. And I'd had quite a bit of experience with setting up projects based in the community in the area of mental health. So I knew the ropes, if you like, and I knew how to access grant funding. And we formed the UEDG with mainly members of the arts group, myself, member of the community council, Gary. I think the founding directors were John Chinnery, Gary, and myself, Gary Buckley, because you needed 3 directors to set up this community entity, the Upper Eskdale Development Group. And we put in for some funding through the community council to do a sort of consultation and I think it was like a pilot study to see whether there was any mileage in having this asset and whether it would be used, etc. And we hired Brian, the Canadian Brian was involved in that as well. Nancy was very involved. Bella, very involved. And we got somebody through the council, I think it was Mary Telford Jammeh, came up to do a public consultation exercise for us here. And then with a guy from Bentpath, who's long gone now, a guy called somebody Bellas. He's an ex-RAF guy. He was good at getting stuff on paper in terms of sort of project plan. And we wrote this project plan. I had quite a bit of input into it. And this room we're sitting in now was originally going to be a cafe, and we were going to use the classrooms as arts spaces. And it sort of grew and grew from that we applied for lottery funding for some startup money, got that. We applied, or I applied actually to the LEADER project, which was European funding, and we got that. And we started a hub here before we'd started any rebuilding or anything like that. We threw a renewable energy initiative. We got the money to put in what was considered renewable, a wood burning pellet stove in here. And along with that, because their criteria was that the building had to be well insulated, we got all the money. This wasn't part of the 2013 build. This was done by volunteers with grant money for all the materials, which we did in about 2010, I think. And we'd run film shows here once a month, piggybacking on other things like on the Southwest Screen Show, which was an initiative of the Dumfries and Galloway Council.
I'm Trudy King-Gunn. My wife and I moved to the Valley in November 2020, just after the first lockdown. We used to have a dog care business that revolved around obviously the owners going on holiday, and then we would take the dogs on their holiday. But due to COVID, that completely shut down. Blah, blah, blah. And we'd never heard of Eskdalemuir, Castle, we hadn't heard of Lockerbie, hadn't even heard of Langham, anything like that. And we were only up in sort of near Glasgow. So we came to look at the house, and the guy who owned it actually had worked for our company before. So we thought, well, this is a bit of a sign, this is a good sign. But when we moved there, we noticed just just the energy shift. Now, I wouldn't call myself particularly spiritual. I'm open to lots of things, you know. I am a bit spiritual, but not like, I don't do much about it, if that makes sense. But we could just feel the energy change, just getting out of the car. And it just felt right. So we had a look around the house and we thought, oh, geez, it's got so much work we need to do. It's, you know, it's just, we're going to be doing this for years. Has it got enough space for me and the mother-in-law? Is the mother-in-law's moving in with us? And I'm like, oh, okay. So we actually talked ourselves out buying it. And then as we were leaving, Angelo was opposite, and he lives opposite us, and he turned around and he was like, hi. And we're like, oh, hi, how are you? And Jack went, do you know what, I'm just going to go in again and have another look around. And then we thought, right, well, we're not just going to buy it because we had nowhere else to go, but, you know, just the whole thing felt right. So yes, we put an offer in and we moved in November 2020.
Oh, thank you. So it was more the atmosphere, the feeling, or was there anything else about the valley that struck you at that point?
Just how beautiful it is, and the fact that we'd never heard of it or been this way. And it was funny because the route the sat-nav brought us, it brought us off at Moffat and brought us all through like the back roads, and I could see my mother-in-law eyes are sitting in the back going, where are we going? That again it just built this excitement of where are we going to end up. And as we sort of drove, we came in here and drove sort of past the church and everything, so I'd never even seen the hub or knew it was here or anything like that. And then got to Castle Law and we were like, it just feels, even the abandoned house next door to us, which obviously we found out very quickly was abandoned because it looked abandoned, didn't put us off. You know, it was a mess next door, but we just felt like everything was just right for that house, for us to be there. When we moved, we knew the house needed a lot of work, and obviously we were locked down again that Christmas, so we couldn't do anything about work. And as we were going through Christmas, Jack decided that she would love to start a gardening business. And we were having some work done in the house in between lockdowns, and she was chatting to like one of the electricians, and he'd not long been in the valley himself, and she was talking to him about it, and he was like, oh, he says, this would be great because you'll get a lot of interest, because there's a lot of male gardeners around, but there's not very many female gardeners around. And I think people especially there's a lot of sort of older folk, a lot of older single ladies might need a hand, but not very comfortable with having guys about maybe. So just give it a go. And it's something that she's always wanted to do and been like hugely passionate about. We started that, I say we, because I was a lavender girl for like about 3 months. And then I was like, no, I can't do it anymore. So that's it. No, I'll go back into my early retirement. Yes, we launched that in March 21, and it's amazing. And that's why she's not here today, because she is out there strimming in the rain, and just like, and that's again a good reason for coming here, because being outside, that's what Jack really thrives on. So that's why she's wanted to be a gardener for so long. Mm-hmm. So she did that. I didn't do very much at the beginning, not because I was, she was the worker. It's just I was actually quite unwell after lockdown. COVID had affected me quite badly, as in not because I had it, well I did have it, but like a lot of people, a lot of sort of mental sort of depression and things like that. I hated the thought of having to move us all from this big house to this little house. It was just, for me, it was just too much for my little brain to deal with. So I didn't work for a little while because I was quite poorly. But I still sort of, we came up here a few times, just obviously discovered the area and things like that, but I kind of probably kept quite to myself in the beginning for that reason. And then sort of through the summer I got better. And then I started to look for a job for myself. I heard that there was maybe a position opening up here. But all the while that was going on, we'd immersed ourselves a bit more in the hub. Jack found herself on the board. fresh young blood on the board. So she was like, okay. And then just as the job was coming up here, Jack became chair of the board. So we were like, oh, well, that's like scuppers my chances of getting the job, because people are just going to think, because the chair of the board. And she was like, no, I'll look into it. So she looked into it and found that basically she couldn't have anything to do with my position. And she still doesn't, because obviously it's a huge conflict of interest. So I thought, I'm going to go for the job here and see if I can tie it in with the schoolwork. 20 hours a week started, that's what I'm on. So I was lucky enough to be offered the job after the interview stage. And I've been here, this is my second year here. It's a 3-year post, so I'm going to have to start looking for funding to continue. But I've seen a lot of changes here in the since I started. Just sort of, because obviously the hub coming out of COVID was a difficult stage to get sort of it back up and running, the kitchen up and running, things like that. So I hope I've made a difference working here. I feel I have, and I really enjoy working here as well.
My name's Naomi, and I grew up in the schoolhouse, which is next to what is the hub now, but it used to be the primary school of Eskdalemuir.
And when did you first come to the valley, Naomi?
I think I was 12 or 13. That could be 86.
86, gracious.
No, or 84. Hold on. Where
roughly about that.
Yeah,
right.
And maybe 84.
84. And you came from the city, did you?
Came from London.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So how was that then, your first impressions when you came here to the valley?
The first impressions was horizontal rain, really, really cold, and a long way from anywhere. And I'd never seen anywhere which was as remote as this. This was really remote for me. I remember driving from Lockerbie to Eskdalemuir, and we used to come to Sammy-Ling, that's right, we used to come to Sammy-Ling for our holidays for a few years before we moved up. So I was used to it, yeah. But it was that long drive, which felt like a really long drive from Lockerbie to Eskdalemuir, and the rolling hills, and it felt very remote. And it was always horizontal rain. I was quite excited, actually.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
I know it was less people, but I was quite happy for the change. It was a complete difference. So
yeah.
It was kind of, everything was a novelty for me and new.
Right. Yeah. And so in what way did you find it a novelty? What were your
like, for example, seeing people make fires. I'd never seen anyone make a fire. I'd never even seen a coal. And and the big rolling hills, and just walking and like not having to wear watches and just come back when it got dark, and like having lots of time and lots of space. My mum didn't drive and we didn't have a car. So in order to get places, we either hitched or just got lifts, or people would walk. And I just think it's funny now that you think that people would actually start making a walk for Lockerbie for a day out, like 15 miles away. Yeah. When we used to go out, we were teenagers. Yeah, we'd be hitching lifts from people passing by, or people from Sammy-Ling, or people going into town, and like begging people to come and pick us up. And I was just remembering now, I was just recounting when we had the odd sunny day, and how much I loved walking through the fields barefoot and swimming in the rivers.
Yeah,
it became like a really big thing, when it was sunny, everyone would go out, wouldn't they, to swim in the rivers.
To swim in the rivers,
yeah. So I feel like everything changed. In my experience of coming home from being away and coming back, is that everything changed when the bus came. Right. Because for somebody, if you don't drive and don't have a car, like the bus service, and having a bus which comes 3 times a day is like a game changer. Mm-hmm. It means you're connecting trains, it means you can go out and get food.
Yeah.
You're not like relying on other people. It just changed everything, and I feel like it feels like the valley feels much more open now, doesn't it? I think.
Mm-hmm. Open.
I mean, like now that there's also the hub, and there's groups of people coming through, like you get bikers coming through and you get cyclists coming through, and it's kind of on a route. And I think that Sammy-Ling's on a route now, whereas I think when we grew up there was no real. There might have been a signpost, but didn't feel like it was on a kind of route through southern Scotland.
Yeah, so that was a sense of feeling much more remote then, perhaps, wasn't it?
It felt much more remote back in those days.
Yeah.
Now things, I think for me, like I think the bus changed everything. And obviously now that the hub's open the way it is, it feels more open and connected.
Yeah, so it gives more opportunity for people to meet in the community, or to meet people that have
and for people travelling through to experience new things. So I think now Sammy Ling's on a kind of cultural route, isn't it, that people come and see, and things just feel more open.
Do you notice the difference between in the valley, or perhaps the environment, between when you first arrived and how it is now?
I suppose the bigger difference is that there's been a lot more kind of logging going on. Like when I was a kid, most of the forest was still kind of maturing, so there wasn't so many log lorries and things like that. So the kind of increase in sort of commercial forestry is probably the biggest change. And then I suppose when I was a child, there was still, most of the farms were owned by families that had been in Eskdalemuir for several generations. So there was Clark Hill was the Cartners, and Raeburn was the Walkers, and then there was the Dalgleiches here at Home Farm, and those people were kind of, several generations into farming. And Mary, who I went to primary school here with, she was the last in the line of the Cartners, but obviously didn't want to take on the family farm, went to university in Glasgow, studied graphic design. And so when her father kind of came to wanting to stop running Clark Hill Farm, he gave up the land, and that was bought out by the same company that owns all of the commercial forestry. And over time, a similar thing has happened with most of the farms in the valley. And I think that kind of monopoly of land ownership is the shame, and also the kind of the connection with the land and understanding of how things work in the valley has been lost. For example, Mary's father would always dredge out the stream to the north of the village, and when the ownership first transferred to Kronospan, they didn't know about doing that, and so there was an issue with flooding that would occur in the winter. And there's those little kind of things where people have worked with the land for a long time and they know what needs to be taken care of. That kind of loss of sort of knowledge around Eskdalemuir is kind of like a sad thing. And I suppose like a lot of us hold that information, a lot of the kind of community hold the information about the land, but it's not necessarily the same level of caretaking that goes into things as would have been if it was, less of a monopoly.
Yeah, so sort of coming away from the school and maybe thinking about the environment, because you said earlier that you felt, although the Sammy Ling brought you here, there was also, when you got here, there was a real feeling of belonging. How has that changed, and how has different things impacted that over the years as you've been here?
I think it's changed hugely. I think the time when I was at Moodlaw was the most magic time, because there was hardly any forestry at that time. I mean, the first time when I said I went to visit this lady with this party, there were hardly any trees at all then. And when I moved into Moodlaw in the early days, there were hardly any trees. So the forestry has kind of crept along over the time I've been here, really. And the time I was in Moodlaw, the fields on the way, from Sammy Ling into Moodlaw in the spring and summer were absolutely full of wildflowers, completely full, beautiful. And then on Clark Hill there used to be loads of skylarks in the summer. You just want to lie down and listen to all these loads and loads of skylarks and lapwings, all kinds of different wildlife and birds. So I see that as a vast change, because in recent years there's been a commercialisation not only of trees everywhere, which has also changed I think it's changed the climate. It's much wetter now, it's much darker with all the dark trees. Then there's all the mass production of ducks and pheasants, which has also changed vastly the ecology of the area. In terms of the fish, in terms of all kinds of things, that there's much more predators, different predators on things now. And then the shooting. So all those things have made a really, really big impact. And now we have very fast wood lorries going through the roads and through the village, and fast cars. So yes, it's changed the whole environment massively. And you were mentioning also, Bill, about the music and the ceilidhs and dances that they had in the observatory.
Yes, there was a room at the observatory for socialising, and they used to have some quite good nights there as well. One of them quite memorable because it was a very, very cold night outside. Inside, as the evening went on, it got very, very hot, and it was a tiled floor. The tiles started to sweat, and people started sliding about on the tiles, and if they fell, they got a bit messy. It was a memorable Kearley that night.
Well, how do you see the difference now then, Bill, to Eskdalemuir Valley to how it was when you were there? Do you see a lot of changes, and what might they be?
Totally different. At that time, there was only 2 areas of afforestation, which was Castlelower and Twigleys, which were planted immediately after World War II. And when we went there in 1948, the trees were only sort of this high. But the rest was all sheep farms. So there was a complete difference from what you see today, with most of being afforestation now.
Yeah, so that's the main obvious difference.
The biggest difference is the fact that the sheep farms have almost disappeared, and forestry has taken over.
So Claire, have you got a sense of how your work and how the valley in general may have changed since you arrived, or any changes that you've noticed?
I haven't noticed any particular changes, if I'm honest. I think the community hub has made a big difference to the valley, and there were obviously people who felt that it would never work, and I think the fact that people grasped the nettle and went with it anyway, should be congratulated, really, because it's made a big difference to the number of activities and things that we can have access to. Whereas in some of the bigger cities you wouldn't have access to a lot of the things that we have access to. And so I do think it made a big difference having the hub, and it meant that people from every part of the community could come together, as opposed to farmers doing farming things and Sammy Ling Monastery doing Sammy Ling Monastery things. This is a sort of a creative space for everybody. Not really. Apart from the services being not eroded as such, but schools closing and all the things that made country life or formed a community have sort of been eroded. But I feel that other things have taken their place. So I don't feel that it's been detrimental or as detrimental as it could have been. I suppose the only other threat would be an ageing population, really. Neighbours who would help neighbours often find themselves unable to do that because they're all struggling with, growing older. So I see that as potentially a slight problem in the future.
Although we actually now seem to be having a drop-in for children and adults and toddlers, parents at the hub, and there surprisingly quite a few young children around, so that's quite heartening.
We've certainly got a few up at my end of the valley. And hopefully that those people will stay, those children will
change entirely.
Change entirely, absolutely, yeah. So
I think the biggest disadvantage is there's not the people to support anything in the valley, because all your forestry workers, they're contractors and they come into the valley and they go back out and the money goes out the valley.
Yeah.
They're making their money in the valley, but it's going out of the valley. Whereas when I was young, but the wages were £3 a week. Now they wouldn't work for £3 an hour.
I guess you could buy a lot more for £3 then.
Oh, exactly. Aye.
Yeah.
I can remember petrol at 4 gallons for £1 for 18 shillings. Aye. And I mean before that it was a lot less, but 18 shillings for 4 gallons. You don't get a litre for that now.
That's actually quite an important point, though, I think, what you said about the money going out of the valley now.
Aye.
You know, rather than actually being ploughed back in to the community.
Well, everybody was in the parish, and if there was anything on the parish, well, maybe not the men, but the wives would come and support, although the men, it's the carpet bowling and that, and they came from wherever they were staying. Because they knew it was the only mode of transport. If you wanted to go, you had to go. And before I went, the hall would be full of people at the carpet bowling. But then it just, you probably can count them in one hand now if it's still going.
Well, Mary was just saying when we videoed her the other day that sadly it's not having the interest now, so I think they're having to stop.
No, just another thing. Although bowling seems to be, well, like Westerkirk, I think they'll have quite a number of members. After Elma died, I went to Westerkirk for a while, but I wasn't getting on very well, so I felt I was letting my partners down, and I stopped going there. And at that time, of course, I moved down to Eaglesfield. But there's no the carpet bowling clubs either. There used to be. It's just a sign of the times.
It has to be very flexible and very thin, the paint service, so when you roll it up, it doesn't crack. And gouache and some of the Western pigments he was being offered by well-meaning people, obviously, weren't suitable for the support to be moved around like that. So, cut another long story very short, we ended up using paints. I think we used this. Yes, we used acrylic, but not made. We made up our own. We got the pigment in aqueous suspension and mixed it with the medium carrier, which was like acrylics of different kinds. So it was as close to working as you had before with powders and pigments mixed in with glue in that way. So we worked like that, and he was quite pleased with all of that. It was a bit different though, because acrylic dries and then it's not reversible, and working in the traditional way with the skin glues and so on, it's very difficult to do shading and things because it's reversible in water like a watercolour. So there was adjustments there, and of course when it came to be a lot of people painting the big donkas for the shrine room, it was much better because people would never have been able to cope with the traditional way of doing things. It was too difficult. They're coming in and only having a short term before they started. Yeah. So yes, you'd paint your painting, then you'd cut it out of the frame, and then you'd frame it in the cloth frames. I learned how to do that, and there's different proportions of how you do that for different monasteries and different styles and all that sort of thing.
Have you noticed any radical changes, or how does it feel now? We've got just a few.
Well, definitely the roads is the thing that I noticed the most. How busy they are. Definitely since the pandemic, there's been more delivery vans, but there's more logging lorries. There's just generally more. It's more touristy as well, I think, and there's just a lot more traffic, a lot of motorbikes. Yeah.
But when serving at the Samlin Cafe, motorbikes.
Oh yeah, that's always been a thing.
Yeah.
It's just when you put it with everything else, there's a lot more traffic. Yeah. Like on the, you know, in the week I wouldn't walk the dog on the road up here. I'll only like on a weekend take him up the road.
It's too busy.
And even with the kids with bikes, like you'd think it's the perfect place for learning to ride your bike, but you know, actually when they were little, they used to ride, maybe it was only on a weekend, they used to ride up and down and I'd squirt them with the hose pipe and they ride up and down, but generally they don't bike up and down here. The bikes are all sort of rusty in there because that way it's quite, there's a lot of corners and it would be quite worrying actually having them out on the road. So that is a real shame because it's such a beautiful area.
As I arrived and the centre of my focus when I was here was Sammy Ling, and it was for the first couple of years that I lived here, and that's definitely changed as I discovered, because when I was at university I studied religion but I also studied Celtic civilization, so there was a wonderful discovery of the rich prehistoric history or prehistory of the area, which and so for me, from my own personal perspective, my relationship to the valley has changed, but also I think, you know, talking about Sammy Ling's gone through major changes. I don't, you know, with this development of the other school as the community centre, I feel that the centre of gravity of the valley has shifted somewhat. It felt like, and this is obviously a personal perspective, and other people would have completely different perspectives. But for me and the community that I had here when I arrived, it was very centred around Sammy Ling, and that has now shifted to being a wider community, and that's, I suppose, inevitable with living here somewhere a long time and establishing wider connections in the area. But I don't feel that people. I feel that people move here for more reasons than just Sammy Ling now. Whereas if you'd asked me that 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have said, oh, well, most people would move here for the Buddhist monastery. But
no, well, it's true, because you know we're down at Garwell and there's a place for rent there, and the person who's renting it said not one person's been who's connected to Sammy Ling. It's been all for lots of different reasons, but none for Sammy Ling. So I'd agree with that. Definitely, it's changed, but not changed for the worse. It's just changed, and I think it's nice. There's just loads more people in, and I mean, I used to go up there quite a lot, but I just find my kind of spirituality in nature, I think, now. And
maybe a brief vision going forward, and also maybe touch on life within the community.
I think I live Bentpath, so there is a slight difference between communities, as you know. You know, the Bentpath community is slightly different to the Eskdalemuir community. Eskdalemuir people go more towards Lockerbie for their shopping and things, whereas Bentpath go to Langham. So it kind of splits us that way a little bit. But I feel that because the hub's getting busier, more things happening, it's bringing lots of people together now from all over. So that's really helpful, I think, for the community as a whole, and for our cafe and for us, for the hub, to keep us going. I see the future of the hub being that we need to be thinking about young people, and that the cost of houses, you know, at 350,000 for a 3-bedroom house or whatever up here is really limiting for people to buy. And I think there was a local house not that long ago up for rent at £1,200 a month, and nobody can really afford that rent. So my vision for the valley in the future is probably slightly controversial, and it's not really down to me, but I think it would be good to encourage more entrepreneurial spirit in the valley, so that we get more people who are moving here to be part of the community, that they want to partake in it, that they want to start businesses. And then also it would be really good to get maybe some affordable housing, and also maybe some for old people, supported living, or maybe have them combined, so that the younger people help the older people, and we have a bit more, you know, to encourage our community.
And has your kind of farming, the way of farming, changed a lot in recent years, or is it more or less the same?
Ours is more or less the same, but you know, there are a lot of farms now giving up, and there's a lot of tree planting now, because there is money in tree planting, that's sometimes just the only obvious way for people to go. It's quite hard if you've got a very small farm just to keep going. So if you're going to be offered quite a bit of money for planting trees, well, this is what folk are opting for.
Anything else you'd like to say about, your experience in the valley in Eskdalemuir? Or?
I think for people moving in, I'm quite sure everyone says this, but for people moving in, there's not a nicer community for being welcomed into the valley.
So how do you find life in the valley now, and would you like to say a little bit about also the business perhaps that you've been developing for a long time now, haven't you?
Well, the business really started at Samyeling. And there was a lot of gilding at Samyeling, doing the temple. So when we left, I still had those skills, and I was still using some of them afterwards. Wood carving and Nancy the gilding. The market for antiques and all that died, or at least severely reduced. So we were sort of needed more money. We needed more work. So having the whiskey boxes coming on board really saved us.
Yeah. Well, it's a very strange niche market to be into in the middle of no place.
Exactly, yes.
But in the countryside, it's always extraordinary how people make a living. When you scratch the surface, nowadays especially, it's really fascinating. Yeah.
And has that changed, do you think, because of being more accessible through technology?
Oh yes, absolutely. And yeah, it's just communications are so easy. I mean, in the early days when we first started doing the antiques, it was a firm in Essex. We didn't even have a phone. She used to leave messages on the payphone in the foyer at Samyeling. And anybody would pick up the phone and she would say, can you tell them I need 4 dolphins and 6 eagles? And somebody would wander down and say, oh, this strange woman phoned and said, oh, she needs 4 dolphins and 6 eagles. And then John would say, oh, I better phone Wendy Radcliffe. It's, yes, the change in the way business is conducted around in this part of the world is incredible. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're in central London or, up a dirt track. It's
So it sounds like it's changed a lot how people live in the valley currently. Then
absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's no different, and it's all in the space of 30 years. It is amazing, really, when you think about it.
As well as the hub, how do you feel that the whole valley or the community, are there any changes now since you were here in the early time, or?
Yeah, when I right in the early days, there were a lot more small farms or tenants on the big estates farming. Farming was very predominant. Forestry was fairly minor. Economic Forestry Group had, of course, started, and they were buying up land as hill farming became economically less attractive to people, or people grew old, or estates were selling up, and that was a huge change. To go, I mean, just in terms of the environment, to go from the kind of open rolling hills with a few shelter belts of forestry and the beginnings of some forestry quite a long way out from the sort of centre of Eskdalemuir, to almost blanket. Forestry had started with the Forestry Commission between here and Borland and down the way towards the King's Pools. Those are quite established plantations even in the 70s, but commercial forestry took off big time. 2 or 3 farms were bought up, and converted mainly to forestry, although some farming has kept going. But there are a lot more people living a self-sufficient lifestyle in those days, or trying to. You know, that was very much part of that cultural thing of the 60s and 70s and 80s. I remember, who's got goats these days? And I decided that I would step down when I was retirement age, which I did, and the project has continued to flourish and expand. And interestingly, you know, all the things that are happening now, it's heartening to see were all things that people had identified that they wanted, and we had sort of tried and piloted just in the school as it was. Cafe, films, art, and it's good to see them coming, you know, much more solid foundation, and wonderful that there's so many new people coming into the area. And I think some of it is a direct response of, you know, people come and they maybe, you know, it's house prices, it's lifestyle choice or whatever, but when they see there's a hub, it's like, well, that's, you know, could seal the decision, seal the deal to move. Yeah.
So what do you find particularly inspiring about the community, or maybe difficulties, or and also
I just think,
how has it developed over time?
I think we're quite a resilient community, and there's a lot of, if you want help with something, there'll be someone in the community that can help you. We're such a kind of diverse but clever bunch of people, you know, whether it's handy stuff, whether it's counselling, whether it's just an ear to anything. You know, we're quite, everybody sort of works well together, and especially sort of these days when you've got to think about the future, and you've got to future-proof the area. Yes, the hub is like the community heart, but the community is important anyway, and it's got to be important that we can keep it going, keep ourselves resilient, and just all sort of work closely together and stuff, because we are a diverse bunch in Eskdalemuir. We've all come for a certain reason or other and found ourselves here, and I think that's what I quite like about the place. Is everyone's
Set up